The House passes its version of a state budget. We speak with the Republicans, Democrats, and hear analysis. And the Senate explores the possibility of energy exploration. Next.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Hello again, I'm Kelly McCullen. Thanks so much for watching. The top story this week is from the House, where it approved its budget bill earlier this week. That bill outlines spending cuts, no new taxes, or extending the temporary sales tax. The basics are about the same as in previous weeks we've covered. The budget is a $19.3 billion plan with over $200 million reserved for possible future tax cuts. State education spending would be cut $1.2 billion. GOP budget writers say every public school teacher's job will be funded, but the budget only funds teaching assistant positions for kindergarten and first grade. At the community college level, that system faces a 10% cut, with students paying higher tuition rates. The UNC system faces cuts topping 15%. UNC hospitals would temporarily lose its $44 million state subsidy, and UNC-TV potentially faces a loss of all funding in year 2 of this 2-year budget plan. Network funding in year 2 is contingent on a continuation review. This show airs on UNC-TV, and this network currently receives 45% of its budget from the General Assembly. State highway funds would be shifted to promote infrastructure improvements, a policy shift with that money. The State Highway Patrol would be funded from the General Fund and not the Highway Trust Fund. The DOT would need legislative approval before accepting or seeking grants over $5 million if lawmakers are in session when the grant becomes available. House Republicans say they found efficiencies to offset many budget cuts aimed at health and human services funding. Budget writers say they would use federal dollars to fund some state programs instead of using state money. The GOP says service levels will remain the same for clients. The Early Childhood More at 4 program will shift from the Department of Education to the Department of Health and Human Services and operate under new standards. The House budget eliminates state Planned Parenthood funding. House Speaker Tom Tillis and his Republican team got the budget through. Speaker, how'd you reach the benchmarks you reached, $19 billion in spending?
Well, we started from the ground up. I think probably the thing, it's because it's more technical in nature. People do not realize the revolution and the process this year. It really did start from the committee members. We reduced a lot of the so-called big chairs that people would say 8 people would get in a room and decide what the budget would be based on what the corner office wanted. We did it very differently. We cut out a lot of those so-called big chairs and senior chairs. We got the committees together. We said you got to achieve this run rate. Go figure out the best way to do it. Work with the agencies, make recommendations, and bring it up the chain. We did it in record time. We're passing a budget out of the House sooner than it has been passed out in decades. And in fact, the thing that's most remarkable to me is the lack of objections that we're getting from most of the people outside of the one area of education.
And were you expecting anything less? Education is always a hot button topic. You press that button this budget.
Yeah, well, I think, and they did the last budget. If you think about it, we had even with the reductions in the last budget, we had objections to it. So that's nothing new. What was new was not a significant pushback from a lot of the other agencies or stakeholders. We found that actually encouraging. And in education, we're looking at it. With it constituting such a large amount of the budget, we clearly have to cut from all categories. But I think we're optimistic. I'm particularly optimistic about what I'm hearing on the ground from the superintendents and from the other schools that are community colleges that think they can work on it. We're getting some pushback in universities, and we'll have to continue to work that in the Senate.
$1.2 billion in total education spending reductions. What made that the sweet spot? Is that all? Do you consider that all fat that could be, or cream that could be skimmed?
I think some of it's prioritization. I think when you look at it, one of the things this budget does that again has really been underreported is the increased emphasis in early childhood development. What we've done with Smart Start and More at Ford to make sure that not only is it a child care subsidy, but what kind of expectations can we set to let that groundwork be laid so that child, by the time they get out of 3rd grade, they enter into to grade K through 3 and really build those core reading and learning skills. There's been a significant emphasis placed on that, and I think that that's something that's been underreported. We've got to do a better job of getting out there. By the same token, we've tried to at least provide the allocation for the teaching population as it exists today. We had to make some tough choices theoretically around the teacher assistant ranks, but even that has been probably misreported. I'll give you one example. A school system where here in Wake County, where they've said that what they're going to do so that they can keep some teacher assistants versus all the rhetoric about thousands having to be laid off is to maybe shorten the length of time, maybe not have them there on non-teaching days and shorten the calendar, deal with the calendar. So there are other ways that they could actually work it with the flexibility we have in this budget to preserve a lot of those positions if they go to work at it.
You oppose extending a sales tax or creating a new quote, temporary sales tax. Why is that bad for North Carolina when the Democrats took to the floor and said people don't miss a penny?
Well, if I were one of the Democrats who stood on the floor when that budget was imposed 2 years ago and looked in the eyes of the citizen and said, it's a temporary tax, it's going to go away in 2 years, I want them to get on the television and say, we really didn't mean that. What we meant to say, it's temporary until we make it permanent or until we no longer have to make a tough decision. We decided to make a tough decision versus going back on the word that I believe everybody made when they imposed that temporary tax. And the rhetoric's interesting. They haven't said, they're making it look like we're cutting something that's permanent. Structurally, it goes away on June 30th. I want to see the ad from the minority that says, we're here to raise your taxes, because that's what would have to happen to make that tax occur again in July.
This budget carries promises you made on the campaign trail in 2010. The governor, they're opposed to what it's opposite of what the governor wants. Are you daring her to veto this bill? Is this what you're going for?
You know, I hope the governor will take this bill seriously. I hope the governor will eliminate, to the extent that she can, some of the politics out of the decision. Recognize that there are significant economic advantages to this budget that could potentially increase revenue at the current tax rate that will allow us to reestablish some funding as we move forward. I hope that the governor will look at it in that way. Unlike the governor, the promise that I made and the promise that my party made last year to allow these taxes to go and to not impose a tax increase, I'm going to commit to. And the governor has made a decision not to do that. And I personally would encourage her to look at other ways to get our fiscal house in order without going back on a promise she made last year not to impose new taxes on citizens. Extending the sales tax is a new tax that would have to be written into law and implemented in July. And that's a promise I'm going to keep, to not do that, and I hope the governor will do the same.
All right, Speaker, we'll follow the debate as it goes through the Senate and probably back your way. Thanks for being on the show.
Yep.
The GOP promised no new taxes, but its House budget contains new fees on government services and court procedures. Education fees would be applied to GED testing, and local schools could begin charging $75 for driver's ed classes. The Democrats say some people cannot avoid paying some fees. When you can't avoid a fee, it makes it a tax to them. I'm not going to waste a question asking you if you like this budget. I know where you stand on that. But how well do you think the Republicans did in matching this bill against what they promised North Carolinians they'd do if they were elected last November?
Well, they failed. What they promised they would do is that they could craft a budget without extending the temporary taxes and still protect education and health care and core services in North Carolina, and they simply did not do that. There's severe damage to many parts of state government if their budget were to be enacted, most especially to education, but also our jobs programs and the courts and many other parts of state government.
The Republicans say no health and human services are going to be diminished. They found all the money in savings and in efficiencies, and every school teacher's job is preserved. And I've heard the Democrats say that's not so either.
Well, you don't have to believe me for that. We've had the Department of Public Instruction run the numbers, and we've had a lot of feedback from our local districts about the numbers, and there will be at least 18,000 school personnel let go under this budget, many of them teachers, specifically designated to be fired are all the second and third grade teacher assistants. Many custodians and lunchroom workers and bus drivers and that sort of thing. And there's a discretionary cut passed down to the local administrative units, which will result in a lot of teacher firings and layoffs as well. We know that because they already took cuts in the last two budgets. So to give them flexibility when they don't really have any place to use that flexibility anymore is not to do anything to save jobs.
I've heard debate that saving the temporary sales tax or some amount of it would offset public education cuts, but the Republicans say they can free up $1 billion for working people, put it back in their pockets.
Do we want to compromise education, our public universities, our public schools, with the loss of over 3,000 jobs in the university system, at least hundreds in the community college system, and the 18 to 25,000 that I talked about in the public schools? You know, we only lost, we lost 310,000 jobs in this recession in North Carolina. That's the number the economists give us. You pile 20, 30,000 new job losses on top of that, that's a big hit. It is, of course, true that if you put money back in the economy as a general concept, some jobs should be created in the private sector by that. But at what cost, at what long-term damage to our reputation as a state for rising education, for excellent community colleges, and always available universities?
Representative Hackney, thank you so much for being on the show this week.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So the final package out of the House, $19.3 billion. No taxes, new fees, spending cuts, and some reductions in social services that include defunding of Planned Parenthood. The bill heads to the Senate, where Senate and House leaders have been telling us for weeks, a couple of months now, they are cooperating on budget writing. Journalists are tracking the budget work as well. Jack Betts writes for the Charlotte Observer, and he's seen a budget battle or two around these parts. Jack, good to have you on.
Good to be with you, Kelly.
Harold Brubaker, the representative who wrote this budget in large part, says historical transparency on this budget bill. Is he right?
I give them good marks on that point. While they stumbled early with some closed session briefings of legislators, I think in the main they were trying to do what they campaigned on, which is to bring a new level of transparency. The proof of the pudding, of course, will be in the conference committee when they resolve differences between the House and the Senate version once the Senate does its. But I was struck yesterday, they went on all day long with amendment after amendment, and I remember times when there was a couple hours of debate. More often the Senate would go that short, and then that would be it, when you might have, a legislator might have had the budget bill a day or 2 days. And these folks had 4 or 5 days to study on it. That's for a budget this big, that's not a lot of time, but it's more time than previously.
So in the aggregate, put all that budget together in one package as it stands right now. If you're a North Carolinian, what are you getting in this deal?
Well, you were seeing two things. And I was struck by this listening to debate yesterday. Republicans have kept a campaign promise that helped get them elected, which was that they would adopt a budget in a transparent fashion and that it would be balanced without tax increases, and that would not only reduce spending, but would limit the size of government. I think if you like those promises, you're going to like the House budget. If you have children in public schools or a student, a child or son or daughter who's taking training at community colleges or close to getting a degree, in the university system or who needs help with mental health programs, you may not be so happy. In fact, I think, you know, there are problems there.
But wait a minute. There are people with kids in schools and kids in college and getting mental health, and they want smaller government, reduced spending, no new taxes. Is it, I mean, either or?
I think they will see in time the impact of what they voted for. I mean, I think you're right. Voters asked for this. They asked for a different way of doing things. They asked for, in the manner that they cast their vote, smaller government, balanced budget, and they're getting it. But I think the impact of that is going to come clear, and they'll have second thoughts about it.
Jack Betts, Charlotte Observer, thanks for being on the show this week. You can also Google Jack Betts and find quite a number of articles out there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Would you be willing to donate some of your state income tax refund to help state government operations? A House bill would let you check a donation box on your state tax return. Donations could be given to 5 state departments, support the general fund, or help out the university system. This bill would become tax law in 2012, but it's in committee this week. The House and Senate agree on regulating local government-owned telecommunications companies. Government-owned telecoms could not subsidize customer rates, could not advertise their TV or internet service using public access media, and would pay money back to the city government as if making tax payments. Supporters say municipal companies should compete fairly in the marketplace. Opponents say these agencies would not exist if private companies properly serve the marketplace. The bill needs Governor Perdue's signature to become law. The House and Senate appear near an agreement on another state health plan reform bill. An earlier bill requiring state workers and retirees to pay a monthly premium was vetoed. This new Senate proposal lowers the monthly premiums for state retirees, but not current state workers. A Medicare Advantage program would be offered as a retiree health coverage option as well. Other provisions of state health plan reform legislation remain essentially the same. The House could vote to accept the Senate's new proposal next week and send it back to Governor Perdue. Senate legislation could lead to offshore and onshore energy exploration throughout North Carolina. It would authorize fact-finding missions to gauge the energy possibilities, create an oversight commission, and establish a royalties plan. The Senate Commerce Committee endorsed comprehensive legislation that could lead to offshore and onshore exploration of natural gas and oil. The committee majority supports studying North Carolina's energy options, but some lawmakers want the assurance that local communities can benefit and participate in any future discussions.
My local county commissioners are not supportive of the offshore drilling, but if in fact it's going to take place, they want a seat at the table to see how the funds would be distributed to protect the interests of the coast, the tourist industry, and supposedly the jobs that would be created.
Other senators say energy exploration has been studied for years in North Carolina in terms of what's known about the state's oil and gas reserves. Moore County Senator Harris Blake likes the energy jobs bill, but he wonders if it outlines a study process that will take too long and not start exploration soon enough.
I think overall the bill is great because we're focusing now on energy. And that part is absolutely great. And next year, you know, I think it's a May or August or something, that all the studies that they need to have will be in place to go ahead and start moving on with this.
The Energy Jobs Bill, in part, would authorize an official feasibility study of energy exploration, establish a schedule for how petroleum royalties would be distributed, and create a new Energy Jobs Council that would oversee energy exploration if those feasibility studies reveal that drilling for oil or searching for natural gas is worth the investment. Many Senate Democrats say this bill's pretty good overall, but it seems to lean heavily in favor of business, which they say will come at the expense of environmental concerns.
When you look at this bill in the context of other things going on in the General Assembly, there's a real concern that the healthy balance that North Carolina's maintained between the business community and the environmental community is being adversely affected.
Senators who support energy exploration in the Senate Commerce Committee say our neighboring states are ahead of North Carolina in assessing and supporting the search for energy sources. Environmental groups are on the record saying there isn't enough fossil fuel in the ground, especially offshore, to threaten the state's multi-billion-dollar tourism industry. Senator Bob Rucho is the primary sponsor of the Energy Jobs Act, Senate Bill 709. Thank you, sir, for being on.
Good to be with you.
All right, feasibility study is the first step. What makes it feasible, in your opinion, enough to look at a feasibility study?
Well, I mean, if you look back almost 25, 30 years ago, Mobil Oil spent $103 million just for the right to explore pieces of like a 5 mile by 5 mile piece of ocean out there just to determine whether natural gas existed. And if they're going to spend that much money, something's out there. Our goal is to authorize the governor to set into a compact with Virginia and South Carolina, including North Carolina, in working with the federal government, who has the ultimate responsibility to say you can or can't go out and search it. But we want to find out if there are resources out there worth the industry and the state of North Carolina investing in.
What is worth it? Hundreds of millions? Billions of dollars?
Well, you're probably talking about potentially trillions of cubic feet of natural gas, which would be a great boom, not only for North Carolina, but if we work it out correctly, and which is, in my judgment, very important, is revenue sharing, similar to what they have in the Gulf Coast. It has a potential of delivering about $500 million a year because of royalties and leasehold monies that will allow North Carolina to use that money for a number of reasons that are outlined in the bill, some of which include research on alternative fuels, hopefully a replacement of fossil fuels sometime in the future. Why not use those resources to find a future replacement, which is a great way of doing it.
I grabbed a few comments from Senator Harris Blake, Republican down in central North Carolina, and he says, I love this bill, but he apparently knows all he needs to know. He says it's out there. They've studied it in this state for years and years and years. So on the surface, what more do you think you need to know as a senator pushing this possible policy change?
Well, I mean, it's important to set up a structure so that we in North Carolina will receive benefit from it. Right up to this point, if any of that stuff is being received, the federal government gets more than a lion's share of it. And what we believe is if it's going to affect North Carolina, we want to have a chance to share in the revenue, but also help determine how it's to be accomplished so that it can be safely done without damaging the environment and allowing North Carolina to grow an energy industry that we presently don't have.
How do you calm the jitters and soothe the opposition of the environmental movement, first of all, but of course the tourism industry, because with offshore drilling, it's the tourism that people say could theoretically be most at risk if something went wrong out there?
Well, of course. And if we weren't at the table with South Carolina and Virginia, then they would be determining how North Carolina water is to be utilized. And so it's critical for the governor to jump on board with us and be part of this in putting this compact together to approach Congress to get revenue sharing, to also approach the federal government who determines whether or not we can go out there. But this is 40 miles off the coast. Further than 40 miles. So first of all, it's out of sight. But more importantly, we're focusing on what we anticipate is natural gas, which is a real clean resource for us. And what this could do is provide a consistent, affordable level of energy to help spur on North Carolina businesses.
Thank you, Senator Rucho. We'll have you on soon as this bill keeps moving.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
The House and Senate both agree to merge several educational loan funds into a single fund offering potentially forgivable college loans. Students must earn a college degree in a field suffering critical personnel shortages, then work in that career for a period of time to receive one of these loans. Students who cannot keep that career promise for the set number of years would repay their college loan in the traditional sense. The bill's on Governor Perdue's desk this weekend. A bill boosting 529 college savings plans moves through Senate committee this week. The proposal would drop means testing from the savings program. It would let all families start 529 regardless of how much income they earn. If this bill becomes law, the means test for the 529 would end immediately. The House easily approves new public school guidelines regulating how school officials handle students who show signs of concussion. Every public middle and high school coach, nurse, and athlete would receive annual information on concussions and head injuries. Any athletes showing signs of concussion would, by state law, be removed from a game and not returned that day.
Brain concussions, especially on football and soccer fields, both for men and women, are a serious issue in not only North Carolina but the United States.
The concussion rules would take effect next school year. This bill is in the Senate Health Care Committee. A Senate corporal punishment bill keeps bouncing back and forth from the full Senate floor to committee. The bill would make it harder for school systems that recognize corporal punishment to actually spank a student. Parents would be required to sign their children up for a corporal punishment option. Otherwise, spankings are forbidden. The rules would take effect next school year. Well, when you're online this weekend, we hope you'll look us up. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/legweek. We have an email address, been around a long time, legweek@unctv.org. We read and reply to all notes. If you want to watch an online stream of this show, Legislative Week in Review, visit us online at unctv.org/legweek. And throughout the week, I'm probably more active on Twitter than anywhere else. The show's handle is @NCNLegweek. And you can also search Twitter for my name, Kelly McCullen. I tweet there as well. That's our show for this week. We do hope to see you next time.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.